morning. I love you. Stay on the bright side.
Sometimes I don't know why. At times it can go by so fast. In the twinkling of an eye. Let's enjoy it while we can. Let's enjoy it while we can. Help me share my Lord. Help me share my Lord. On the dark and lonely street. To the bright side of the road. Look it.
Oh, good morning, good morning, good morning. Stevie the Guide here. It's 5 o'clock in Kerrville, Texas, and I'm here on the bank of the Guadalupe River trying to save humanity every way I can, any old way I can, however I can. And I'm going to do it uniquely my way. I'm just going to free flow and hope that it helps raise the vibration, bring the balance between the left and right. The left brain logical is way out of balance with the right brain intuitive. The left brain, the warrior male and the gentle female. There's an imbalance there, and I believe intuitively that somehow if we can bring those back into balance, it brings a higher vibration, and that collective harmony is going to help us. And this is how it comes to me, folks. But I love that Jabba the Hutt line. I used to watch the Star Wars movie with my daughters, and you might remember Jabba the Hutt with Carrie Fisher. Carrie Fisher was like in this I Dream a Genie outfit with a little ring through her nose on a chain, you know. She was a slave girl, and Jabba was like, you know, ho, ho, ho. And whenever my daughters would get in trouble or have something to deal with me on, I'd say, the great Jabba the Hutt is now ready to listen to your pleas for mercy. They hated that. But the other day I was thinking to myself, I said, Steve, what was the best class that you had in college? And a smile broke over my face, and I remembered the sex education class that I had with Dr. Paula Wiesner at St. Edward's University way back in another lifetime. It took me, I got 4.5 years at St. Edward's, and it took me 10 full years to get that 4.5 years because I was running all over the planet with oil and gas exploration companies between the years of, I graduated from high school in 1977, and I graduated from St. Edward's in 1987. It took me 10 full years to get that undergraduate degree. And by far and away, the most memorable, high-impact class that I had in all my college years was the sex education class I had with Dr. Paula Wiesner. And Paula, baby, if you're out there, I love you with all my heart and soul. Thank you for keeping me in that class, because here's how it went down. I show up at the beginning of the semester, and I thought, hey, there's a sex ed class. I think it'll be fun. And so I show up at the class, and it is me and one other guy and 18 women and Dr. Paula, all right? and you know, there's sort of an introduction. There's this like uncomfortable air in the room, and we went through this first class. You know, everybody was just kind of, you know, looking around, so I came back for the second class. I had it like on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at, I want to say, 9 o'clock in the morning. And so on Wednesday, I came back for class, and 3 of the girls had left, and the other guy had left. And so I was the only guy in that class with 15 girls and a female professor. And I got to tell you, man, I was like a cat on a hot tin roof. It was nervy, all right? And Dr. Paula, she pulls me aside, and she's such a wise woman. Dr. Paula, I used to call her Dr. Paula Weisner. That's the way her name was spelled, but I think it was actually pronounced Wiesner, but I called her Dr. Paula Weisner. She pulls me aside. She says, Steve, listen, let me ask you to please not drop this class. Please stay with us, because my whole class is organized around a male and female conversation. And if you leave, then we don't have the male component of the conversation. So I ask you, you know, even though I know there's a lot of sensitive material here, and it's a little, you know, it's a little nervous for you maybe, but don't leave the class. Please don't leave the class. And so I stayed. I was thinking, you know, when I saw all those girls in there and just me, you know, I felt like, a subject in one of those medical school examination rooms where you got the whole theater and then you got the subject on the table in front. You know, I felt like I was under a magnifying glass. And but I hung in there, and thank God, because what happened was we all at the beginning of the class that second day, we all took a pledge of confidentiality. And so we all raised our hands and said we wouldn't say anything about anything we had heard in the class outside of the class, but we could talk amongst ourselves if we saw each other in the hall or whatever. And we went through 2 or 3 classes where we're just kind of getting warmed up, but it happened pretty quickly. And a lot of it had to do because I was willing to share a lot of myself. I was willing to say the sort of embarrassing things, or talk about my body, or talk about sexual experiences that I had. And at some point, very early in that class, there was a chemistry that happened between me and all those females. And there was a trust level that was reached. And when that happened, baby, let me tell you, those girls told me everything, all right? They told me everything. They gave me instruction on what they liked, what they didn't like, how they like to be touched, how they like to be spoken to, what they didn't like in their boyfriends or their husband. I learned the difference between different types of females. There was 2 or 3 of them in there, maybe only 1 or 2 of them, that I would call very dominant leadership kind of women. Others were more meek and mild. They didn't, you know, say quite as much until it really started getting worked up. And I just learned so much in that class. I'm reminded of this joke about this guy that's up in his garage, and he finds an old brass lamp, and he rubs it, and out pops this genie. And the genie is a young-looking genie. He says, "I am the genie of the lamp, and I'm a young genie, so I can only grant 1 wish, not 3." And the guy says, "Okay, what do I want?" He says, "You know what I'd really like is I'm afraid of airplanes and I'm afraid of boats, and I always want to go to Hawaii. And so if you could just build me a bridge from Los Angeles to Honolulu, and so I can drive my car over there, I'd really appreciate it. That's what I want." And the young genie says, "Oh, Master, that's so difficult. Do you realize how deep the Pacific Ocean is? It's a long way. I mean, don't you have any other wish, Master?" And the guy thinks for a second. He goes, well, if you can't build me a bridge to Hawaii, I've always wanted to know all about women. I want to know why they behave the way they do, how they think, I want to know all the details about them. And the genie thinks for a second, and he goes, would a 2-lane asphalt bridge be good enough? Women are hard to figure out, okay? Everybody knows this. It's not news. But that class helped me so much to understand them, and I'm not saying that I really do, but it gave me a lot of insight. It gave me a lot of empathy for what women go through. I learned all about menstrual cycles. I mean, I'm telling you, after a few weeks, a couple of months in that class with all those women, their periods synchronized, okay? They'd all get on a period at the same time, and then I'd go in there and they'd turn on me, The teacher would have to protect me sometimes. I learned an amazing amount, and I'm grateful for that. And so the core of my rant today is basically the core of my rant every day, which is this notion that our left and right brains are imbalanced, and that is the core of the problem on this freaky planet we live on. All right, that we for hundreds of years, or thousands of years maybe, we have been conditioned to function primarily in our left brain logical. We have been strip mined for certain kinds of commodities and to be, in essence, a slave race in many ways. And to not trust that right brain intuitive, that small, still voice, that feminine energy that comes from things like meditation, like shamanic practices, like yoga, like with dancing and chanting and whirling dervishes and people who speak in tongues and all sorts of stuff, that loosening the grip, the tight grip of that left brain, male, logical brain, and allowing the gentle feminine to come forward. Well, a lot of the reason we are imbalanced is because we've systematically, in this male-dominated global society, we have run out and squashed down the feminine influence of the whole thing. We've put women, and they're certainly rising more into balance these days, but still in all, you have this tremendous imbalance. The uppity women, that wanted to assert authority were either quickly put in their place in any number of awful ways or killed. All right, and that's how it went down. And there are many reasons for this. I don't pretend to know them all. But if you look around the planet, there's all sorts of ways that men have kept the women down. All right, enslaved them. Some places they're still no more than chattel. I remember it comes to mind years ago. My dad was in his office and got a phone call from Louisiana. And it was some attorney over there that said that our family still owned land in Louisiana. My great-grandfather was a lumberman in Morgan City, Louisiana. And he used to buy the property and cut off all the trees and then sell the property over there. And you're talking about in 1900 when this kind of thing went down. And in Texas in 1900, women were no more than property themselves. They couldn't vote. They didn't have any real rights. It was totally male-dominated. But over in Louisiana, under Napoleonic law, because it had been the Louisiana Purchase, and in New Orleans in particular, and in that vicinity, the women actually had rights. And one of those rights was that a man couldn't sell off the family property without her signature. And So my great-grandfather, being the male chauvinist that he was, he bought property, cut off the trees, and then sold the property without my great-grandmother's signature on the bill of sale, the contract. And so therefore, even though he got the money, our family still retained. There were clouds on those titles because he didn't give his wife the say-so on the sale of the land. So it was tremendously unfair, but our family group got back like 360 acres of land. And it had to do with the oil rights and the accrued royalties from oil production that have been going on. Anyway, I learned the difference between those two states and historically how women have been put down. When I was a kid, you know, the women's movement, and I'm reminded of the Virginia Slims commercial. You know, you've got your own cigarette now, baby. You've come a long, long way. You know, right? There was all this equality, and Gloria Steinem and whatever her name was, and you know, burning the bra and all this stuff, and you know, that has caused a lot of problems for our world. And the imbalance of male-dominated leadership. Why do the males get to run the show? Why do you think that is? Is because they're the killers, right? When somebody needs killing, they don't send the women to go do it. They send the guy, all right? And most often it's the men who do the hunting and the killing and the violence, all right? That's a left-brain, male-dominated sport. All right, and men kind of like it. All right, they like killing each other. My sister asked my dad one time, "Dad, why do men have wars?" He said, "Because men are basically evil." And to some degree, that's right. And when they get out of balance with their females, it causes a tremendous imbalance. Once they get a taste of that power and they can kill people and stuff, you know, men turn on their wives. It happened throughout history. Powerful men, they fall in love with someone, they marry them, and they have a wonderful relationship until that woman's power and confidence and intuitive leadership begin to start to rise, and she becomes uppity. All right, she starts to challenge the authority of the male. Then what does the male often do throughout history? He kills her. All right, or he gets rid of her. He brings her up on some kind of charges. You know, the Emperor Constantine comes to mind. His wife was named Fausta. All right, and this is in 324 A.D. Constantine married Fausta, and they got along great for a while. Apparently, although I wasn't there to see it for myself, but. He finally got tired of her, and he either boiled her in a boiling pot or an overheated bath, or he poached her in a steam bath. I'm not sure which. All right, but it was horrible. All right, and this happened throughout history. Whenever the feminine energies start to rise and bring balance to the decision making, we killed them off. Now, men have enjoyed this position of power for a long time, but what's happening is very much the same to me as what's happened in China, where you wanted all these males, so you killed off all the female babies. You know, the baby's born, and they either twist its back and kill it, or they snip it with some kind of shears and throw it out in the snow, and so the family can go back and try for another, because they're only allowed, for many years, they're only allowed to have one baby. And the family wants a male baby because it's much more highly prized. The males are leadership. What's happened? Tremendous imbalance in the country of China. You know, you've got all these unmarried males that can't find a female. Gee, and go figure. And that feminine energy is so vitally important to bringing the balance back. Right, and the religions have done a beautiful job of running out and squishing down the females with all sorts of scriptural evidence that they're not supposed to have leadership, which is bullshit, all right? And I'm reminded, I didn't vote for Jimmy Carter, but I always liked him. I thought he was one of the lesser presidents that we had, mostly because he was a nice guy. I think he was the nicest president we ever had, which made him, I think, less effective as a leader, but a really wonderful human being, right? And Jimmy Carter, him and Rosalind, I think they're still married, still rolling. And every year in their 90s, they work for Habitat for Humanity. And I had a lot of respect for Jimmy when I found out that he had left the Southern Baptist Convention. And I want to read you, it's a rather lengthy piece that I found. It's in a magazine called The Observer in July of 2009. It's called Losing My Religion for Equality. And I'm sympathetic to that. I was a Baptist church member for over 20 years, loved the Baptist church, but I had reached a point where I couldn't sign a document. They wanted to make me or they had nominated me to be a deacon. I was helping a Bible study class. I was teaching a men's Bible study class, and they wanted me to, or at least they were nominating me to be a deacon, but I had to sign a document that said, do you believe in the eternal lake of fire for the non-believer, which excludes billions of people, many of whom I know, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it on that principle. But here's what Jimmy says about women, and this is why he left the Southern Baptist Convention, and I identify with this very closely. He says, women and girls have been discriminated against for too long in a twisted interpretation of the Word of God. I have been a practicing Christian all my life and a deacon and Bible teacher for many years. My faith is a source of strength and comfort to me, as religious beliefs are to hundreds of millions of people around the world. So my decision to sever my ties with the Southern Baptist Convention after 6 decades was painful and difficult, as was mine. It was, however, an unavoidable decision when the convention's leaders, quoting a few carefully selected Bible verses and claiming that Eve was created second to Adam and was responsible for original sin, ordained that women must be subservient to their husbands and prohibited from serving as deacons, pastors, or chaplains in the military service. This view that women are somehow inferior to men is not restricted to one religion or belief. Women are prevented from playing a full and equal role in many faiths. Nor, tragically, does its influence stop at the walls of the church, mosque, synagogue, or temple. This discrimination, unjustifiably attributed to a higher authority, has provided a reason or excuse for the deprivation of women's equal rights across the world for centuries. This is Jimmy Carter speaking. At its most repugnant, the belief that women must be subjected to the wishes of men excuses slavery, violence, forced prostitution, genital mutilation, and national laws that admit rape as a crime. But it also costs many millions of girls and women control over their own bodies and lives, and continues to deny them their fair access to education, health, employment, and influence within their own communities. The impact of these religious beliefs touches every aspect of our lives. They help explain why in many countries boys are educated before girls, why girls are told when and whom they must marry, and why many face enormous and unacceptable risks in pregnancy and childbirth because of their basic health needs are not met. That's former President Jimmy Carter, what he said in leaving the Southern Baptist Convention after 60 years. And it was a difficult decision for him, but he could not live with those ridiculous principles. And those are an example of how we've used the religion to oppress people. half of our population basically is women, all right? And we've used these scriptures to deceive them and to oppress them, and to force them back into a corner. And hey, back in the day, they just burn your ass at the stake, all right? They'd hang you, they'd boil you, you know, they put you in the dungeon until you were so tired and beaten down that you do whatever they said, all right? And this has been the practice. And you can trace this kind of stuff to things like a book that King James, you remember good King James, who wrote the King James Bible. I've always thought that the King James Bible was very poetic and beautiful, and I still do. And I love the Bible. I study the Bible all the time. It's been a guiding force in my life, the ethical and moral principles of the Bible. However, many people don't know that King James also wrote a little book called Demonology. Demonology gave royal credence to the notion that there are witches in our midst, and that we must find them and destroy them. And so witches, by and large, were women, all right? And they found men, too, who they accused and burned of being witches. But it was mostly women. And who was mostly is the wise women, all right? The influential women. The women had knowledge. Often women were medical personnel. They were midwives. They were the ones in your community who you took your sick child to, and you went to. And she had a knowledge of the natural plants. She had a knowledge of spirituality and higher realms. She has the feminine intuition, right? She has a broader knowledge that men really mostly don't possess, all right? And so in turning religion into a corporation and attempting to make monopoly out of religion, the men did not like the fact that the women had direct connection to a higher spiritual realm. All right, and they had that feminine strength, and didn't like it because the people of the community were drawn to those intelligent, intuitive women. All right, and so what did they do? The King James book, Demonology, gave rise to people, horrible people. A prime example is a guy named Matthew Hopkins. All right, Matthew Hopkins I can't remember the year, 17 or 1800s. I think it was 1800s. Matthew Hopkins was the self-appointed witch hunter general of England. And he got himself a cloak and some black boots and a hat, and he looked like a government official, but he wasn't. He was just a contractor. And he found out very quickly that he could make a lot of money going into different communities and finding their witches and getting rid of them. And what he would do basically is he'd come to your town and he'd go into the local pub. He might buy a few people or a couple of rounds of drinks, and then he would start to stir up the gossip mill. Who were the weirdos in town? Who were the strange people? Who were the odd women that were in the town? And oftentimes it would be some powerful woman who was a landowner. Oftentimes they owned their own home, they had their own house, their own crops. They didn't really need anybody. They didn't have to go to church. All right, that was one key. Was they didn't go to church and become subservient to the local authorities, religious authorities, and. So they would identify and they'd say, yeah, she practices weird stuff. We think maybe she poisoned the well or had old man, Jones have a heart attack or, made the cow go dry or whatever. And this kind of Hopkins would find out these things. He'd find out where she lived and he'd go busting into her door at about dinner time one night and accuse her of being a witch. And he wanted a confession. And there were actually certain laws. He couldn't just, strip off her clothes and start beating the hell out of her. But he could prevent her. They would systematically deprive her of food and sleep, and be saying, you're in league with the devil. You need to confess that you've been having sex with the devil, and that you did all these horrible things. And being a strong, wise feminine, she'd say, no, I didn't do that. But they would wear her down over time. No food, no sleep. They have 2 or 3 people walking her around, keeping her awake all night, trying to get a confession out of her. If she had some strength and she resisted after 2 or 3 days of that, they'd strip her and go throw her in the freezing river for a while and, expose her to hypothermia, and break her down even more, And then, and in some extreme cases, they bring out the pillywinks, which are the little thumb screws. And, they'd usually crack over that. So finally it's like, okay, I'll say whatever you want, and just make the torture stop. So when she confessed and signed a little document, Matthew Hopkins would drag her down to the authorities and show the confession, and then, she'd be burned at the stake, and Matthew would get the money. They'd pay him a big fee to have gotten a confession out of this witch. All right. And then what happened? They have a public hanging or burning or whatever it is. And they call all the townspeople and they say, this is a witch. All right. And they'd say, have a good look, everyone. And all the people, they'd say, we're normal people. And this is where a lot of this suppression of our intuitive qualities. This is the core of why many people tell me over the last couple of years that they've had supernatural visitation, they've seen visions, they've had out-of-body experiences, they have divine guidance and protection from entities beyond our physical senses. And so this is why we're scared, all right, is because these vicious religious authorities for hundreds of years have done all sorts of things. You can't imagine how powerful they were in Europe. But anyway, Hopkins would get paid. Oftentimes she was a landowner, and so they'd confiscate the land. He might even get a piece of that. The community was happy, and the church would get, whatever she had. And he'd get paid, and he'd move on to the next town. He'd identify several of them. He was hard at work, making a lot of money. And all that activity went on for a long time. And where did it finally end? All right. It ended in Salem, Massachusetts, right here in these United States of America. And there were 20 women, I think, all of them, who were executed for being witches. And hundreds others that were tormented, jailed, tortured, who knows what, right here in America. All right. And so we're not that far away from this. All right. And I'm kind of on my little soapbox here. But this is the core of why we are imbalanced, all right? Why there's such an imbalance in our world is because we don't allow the females to have the influence. Just like Jimmy Carter says, they don't have fair access. We deny them fair access to education, health, employment, and influence within our communities, all right? We have not allowed them leadership, spiritual leadership, when these people, these females, are the most spiritual among us, all right? They are the ones with a greater access to the right brain intuitive, that feminine energy. And the left brain logical has created this whole corporation around spirituality, set up all these rules and regulations in an attempt to monopolize spirituality. All right, and anyone who's gotten in the way of that machine has been tortured and killed or marginalized somehow. And And this has created the imbalance, this type of activity. You can identify it in all sorts of forms all over the planet, but this is the core of it. And until we realize, and it may be that the poor male has got to be beaten back into a corner with some kind of disaster or collapse of the economic and food system, where he's, in a broken state. Well, who does he call for when he gets into a broken state? Calls for his woman to come and care for him, And then when he gets strong, he shoves her back in a corner. This is the problem, all right? I believe that the essence of it and the changing of the male attitude, the normal, natural, balanced state of a human being, be they male or female. These females, they've got a lot of the intuitive female qualities, but they've been raised and trained by men, all right, under the rules and regulations of a male-dominated system. This is precisely what Jimmy Carter was feeling, and he wasn't willing to tolerate it. After 60 years in the Southern Baptist Convention, he said, I've had enough of that. It's not right. And his intuition, his gentle, kind, fair spirit, came forward and would not tolerate it. And he didn't care, who voted for him or who liked him or whatever. He trusted the intuition. All right, he had seen enough. All right, and that, my friends, is where we all need to get to. All right, not what we're taught, not what we read. You got to take in all the education and experience you've had. But at the same time, on the right side, you've got to take all that and you've got to weigh it on the scale of your own heart, your own intuition. You've got to weigh it. You've got to say, do I actually believe that? And for me, myself, my relationship with the Baptist Church, whom I love, and it was a painful and difficult decision to leave, but it came in the midst of them wanting to honor me with a nomination to be a deacon of a large Baptist church in Houston. And I was honored to my toes that they wanted me at least to be considered to be a part of their leadership. It was a great honor. But I could not sign a document that said two things. One is the Bible the complete and perfect and eternal Word of God, meaning nothing else before or after the Bible holds any water. All right? I couldn't do that. And the last line especially, do you believe in the eternal lake of fire for the non-believer? That means anybody who doesn't believe our way is going to be eternally tortured in the lake of fire. And as I have traveled around this planet for a huge portion of my life, I know lots and lots of people who don't believe that Christian, they don't live inside that Christian box. Their mommy and daddy taught them all sorts of other ways to access the universal God, all right? The spirit, the force that creates worlds. And I said it before and I said it again, the notion that you could take something as large and unknowable as the organizing force that creates worlds and universes and stars and sunsets, and put it into your box and say, this is ours exclusively, and if you don't believe it, you're going to burn, all right? That sounds much to me like a human quality. The desire for monopoly is a human quality, a male-dominated human quality to dominate a certain field, to have the whole market share and not let anybody else have it. That's a human corporation type mentality, and it doesn't wash. And that's what Jimmy Carter was saying here. It doesn't wash. And his intuition won. And whatever you think of him politically, I don't like to talk politics. I don't care. I watch politics mostly as entertainment, frankly. But you got to love the guy. Jimmy followed his heart and did what I believe was absolutely the right thing. So what do I have to say? What more do I have to give you? Well, I would say that the women have had a tremendous influence on the whole world, and if you look throughout history, you can point to all kinds of examples where you had these strong women who were helping, and they were pressed down. I think I ran through most of what I had to say, but here's a quote from Albert Einstein that I really liked, and it's for all you guys who are unmarried, who want to find a wife, who want to find a woman to have in your life. This is a good thing to look for, in my opinion. Albert Einstein says, the woman who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The woman who walks alone is likely to find herself in places no one has ever been before. So the message there for the woman is not to leave your friends or your church. I'm not advocating that you leave church. I like to go to church. There's nothing quite like Christmas in church. There's nothing quite like the family and camaraderie of church. And I like to go to church very much like I enjoyed going to university. And if I had the time and the money, I would probably be taking classes in university all the time. Part of the reason I continue to go to church is because it's like going to class. I learn things. I have interaction with wonderful, good-hearted people who are filled with the love of Christ and who aspire to a Christ consciousness. They're in different levels of education. Anyway, point is, from Albert Einstein, the woman who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The woman who walks alone is likely to find herself in places no one has ever been before. So for the guys, in my opinion, you should find a woman who's walking alone. You should find a woman who's confident in herself, who is not easily influenced by a group of people. Find yourself a self-assured woman who has her own program. And from there, she is able to share leadership in her own special way. That is a valuable woman to find, in my opinion. One who is not only compatible with you, who has a very compatible vibration. And my friends, when you find a woman who has a compatible vibration, she doesn't even have to talk to you, in order for you to feel that. You'll know. There is a wide range of nonverbal communication, and if you don't know that by now, you're talking on a cell phone every day. There is invisible frequency that moves around us that we use all the time. We just don't realize sometimes that we can use that. But a woman of compatible vibration will talk to you in all sorts of ways without speaking, and she's one from whom you can learn all sorts of things, and she's confident. If you can find and if you can hold the tension of a woman like that, hold the attention of her, win her love, you've won something very special. And for all the women out there, I encourage you. You, as we all are the product of hundreds of years of conditioning that have corralled all of us in some way or another. And it is an art form, ladies and gentlemen, to begin to relax all of that research, that reading, that education, the stuff we've been told, the stuff we've been taught, the stuff we've told we can't do, the stuff we told we're not to do. It's an art form to let that relax and to explore the deep well of the intuition. and the women oftentimes, especially the gentle, kind, non-combative, non-confrontational women, they don't want any trouble. And so they just follow the rules, all right? They follow along, and they may have their own private thoughts, but they, like everyone, have been cowered into a position of not using their feminine intuition, their deep knowledge, their the deep well of their soul. They've been trained not to. It's like in the artist's way that I talk about, that inner child, that little artist child that's in you. What happens when you take a child and you're the parent, and all that child wants to do is be close to you and talk to you and hug you and be in your presence all the time. But what happens when you routinely set that child aside and say, no, Johnny or Susie, I don't have any time for you. No, you're not supposed to be that way. No, you're supposed to be quiet. No, you're supposed to, only speak when spoken to, all right? And when you do that enough times, you know what happens? That child doesn't come and want to talk to you anymore, all right? That's what happens. And it is the same with your inner child, folks, especially you women out there. Your inner child, your right brain, intuitive, feminine energy really does want to play, all right? But oftentimes we're caught in this left brain logical thinking. What we've been taught, what we've been shown is acceptable. I think I've told you earlier about this friend of mine that lives up in Virginia, wonderful gal. And she found out I talk about all these kind of things. I hadn't seen her in 35 years, but a very intelligent, intuitive woman. And she called me crying one day and said, I have a wonderful husband. I have 4 wonderful kids. I have a wonderful community and a church family and everything. But I feel alone and I'm sad. And the reason is because her intuitive side has begun to waken. All right, it's become her intuition, her natural instinct, her authentic human being experience has come forward, and she can see different entities. She has spiritual guides. She has traveled in astral projection. She has all these, what I believe are not supernatural experiences. They are natural human being experiences that we're taught or we're not supposed to have. All right? And she calls me crying because she got no one to talk to. She feels lonely. And my answer to that is just what I'm doing with you here now. All right? To practice the art of being one's authentic self and letting the chips fall where they may. All right, to speak one's own language, however it comes to you, and not be afraid of who might be offended or who might reject you. Now, to speak your truth courageously and then see who hangs around. All right, that is how you will find your tribe of people with whom you can converse in your own intergalactic language, with your own vibrational frequency. I'm from the Sombrero Galaxy, maybe not, but it looks pretty and I'm attracted to it, who knows? But all I'm saying here is you have to be willing to speak the language that comes to you. And what will happen, believe me, I've been doing this for a couple years now. What will happen is that when you begin to speak in terms of what has authentically occurred in your life, it will, sooner or later, there will be someone within your periphery that perks up. They hear your voice. They come over and they say, hey, who are you? I want to talk to you. What are you talking about? Let me talk about that. This happens we have the Forbidden Discussions here in Kerrville, Texas at the Unity Church every Thursday night. And hey, that's today. And tonight at 7 o'clock at Unity Church here in Kerrville, we have this weekly discussion from 7 to 9. And what happens is when I speak in terms of things that have happened to me and how I was protected and guided and had, visitors from, somewhere else and out-of-body experiences, what inevitably happens when I speak this language openly and fearlessly because I love you and for no other reason, for another reason, which is I need to do it. It's therapy for me, all right? But I love people, and I'm going to share my genuine human being experience before I die, all right? Tick tock, folks. This body has an expiration date at some point. All right. How many more minutes do you got? Huh? And so if you're willing to speak your authentic self, if you get tired of hiding under this garment, this cloak called normal, trying to be normal, trying to fit in, if you get tired of that and you start to feel sad and lonely because you got no one to talk to, the only solution that I can find is to begin to speak openly as if it's not going to have any consequences at all. And I think you'll find that as you do that, not only will you feel better, and not only will you attract your tribe of people that have had similar experiences. There are a lot more than you might imagine. It is a natural human being thing to have this right brain intuitive awareness, that this access to a broader band of frequency. And I'll say it again, if you don't believe that, then explain to me how a man can get struck by lightning and very shortly be an expert at writing and playing symphony quality piano music. Acquired savant syndrome. There are many cases of this where all of a sudden people have acquired this vast knowledge. There are many cases where psychics find, lost children, and where people have premonitions of things that actually happen, and all sorts of things. The human being is far more complex than we give it credit. And the powers that be, especially these dominant religious powers that tell us, no, there are people that had these sort of things way back when that you can read about, but no, you don't have this, and no, take a pill. The psychiatric community loves this shit, okay? Because, you have these things. In shamanic culture, if you display this unusual behavior, they embrace you. They say, wow, this person has qualities we want to learn about. All of a sudden you become, part of the leadership, and you're embraced by the other humans, and you're brought into balance and harmony. In our culture, you're shoved away as somebody who's weird, and they say, hey, take this pill. You got to eat one every day for the rest of your life, along with maybe some others too. It's gotten way out of hand, that pendulum. Hey, the mental health community and the medical community, thank God for so much of what they do. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving out any medical advice. It's just my real world observations here. You break your arm or you get malaria like I did, hey, thank God for those pharmaceuticals, But the daily management of millions of people's lives through chemicals does not seem like a good thing to do for most folks, in my opinion. It's just that we're so spoiled. We write 85% of the world's prescriptions on this planet right here in the good old USA. What is wrong with this picture, all right? And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that what's wrong with this picture is that we have been deprived and discouraged from balancing our left and right brain through the traditional practices that have been passed down from our elders from time immemorial, but it was cut off by political and religious forces for the last several hundred years. And that is the problem. And so whatever I can do to save humanity by helping raise this vibration, because when you gain balance and you have a harmony and an equilibrium in your own brain, it raises your vibration. It activates more fully that powerful electromagnetic energy that's in your heart. Go check it out. Your heart is the center of electromagnetic energy. And when you achieve a balance in the computer, folks, the electromagnetic energy goes up. And it becomes connected with all those other rising vibrations. And just like in cymatics, there's a harmony that happens which changes the pattern. It changes the pattern of the vibration as a collective. And when that happens, the world changes. I believe it is that Christ consciousness that happens. That, in my opinion, that second coming of Christ is real. It's just not how sometimes the left brain logical thinks it's going to happen. I believe it's a collective vibration, and when enough people get it, and we're able to raise a vibration, humanity will change. And a spirit of brotherly love will be prevalent, and the mentality of the corporation and the monopoly will loosen and eventually give way to a more harmonious way of life. Instead of, just take whatever you can, enslave everybody for cheap, rip out the resources, fish out the ocean, toss the trash, keep making plastic bottles. I mean, whatever, it is this drive. There is a train wreck, that we are on our way to, which is going to cause a massive die-off of human beings. And it is this train wreck between corporations and the needs of humanity, all right? The needs of corporations are swinging way out of balance. If peace breaks out on the planet tomorrow, it's bad for the economy. If good health breaks out on the planet tomorrow, bad for the economy. Any number of things. If cryptocurrencies become prevalent and people can trade money without the fiat currency, bad for the Federal Reserve and the central banking system. If you become a well-balanced, high vibration individual, it's bad for the people that are trying to control you. All right, and so I encourage you, look into the practices. Every day I'm going to say it. A simple meditation practice is very, very healthy. And it is a natural human exercise to bring balance and harmony and equilibrium to your brain. Your brain naturally wants to chatter and be dominant in the left. It's been trained to do that, conditioned, for hundreds of years. All right, and what your parents think and what your grandparents thought and what your great-grandparents and so on, that all comes to you. You are a composite of all that. And so those medieval things that I was talking about, they apply right here and now, right? And it's a bringing of the balance and a rising of your own intuition. What do I actually think about this? And as you let all the left brain logical rules and regulations that have been hammered into your head, especially from 0 to 7 years old. I mean, this is why little children, they're wide open and they have all this intuition, but very quickly, by the time they're 6 or 7, they're squashed into a box. And you're not allowed to think this way. You got to think only this way. The blinders are put on. And it creates an imbalance in the brain. And so when you can tune that radio a little better, you can relax these radio stations and allow this radio station sort of come better into clarity. Amazing things can happen in your life and in the world. And so Stevie the God here, doing whatever I can, laying it out there, trying to bring it, man. I'm bringing it. Whatever way I can. Maybe messy, maybe flawed, I don't care. I got no plan here other than I feel it in my heart. I'm supposed to do this, and it's getting a little easier. I've been doing it about a month now, and whoever you are, I love you with all my heart and soul. And so I hope you go out and have a great day, and follow your heart. It knows the way. I'll see you later.